Okay. So, cooperation between academia, NGOs, and practitioners, the case of Ljubljana. Basically, our talk is split into two parts. The first part will be performed by my presence, and the next part will be presented by Urban and Adam. And I hope we'll explain well these forms of cooperation, these mechanisms of cooperation between academia, NGOs, and practitioners in a very broad sense. So let me just give you a short overview of what will I try to present in this 20-minute presentation. The first question which arises to me when trying to establish cooperation between academia and other stakeholders in this regard is, who are the actors in fact? Who are the stakeholders in this case? Well, I regard them as implementers of specific actions that help to enhance the knowledge of specific social groups in a location. So this is, let's say, the major definition that I would try to stick to, and it's a very broad definition, I know, but the main mechanism that I see here is this transfer of knowledge which happens inside the main process, which will be further explained. So, establishment of links between academia, NGO, practitioners, semi-public institutions, bodies that mediate between different actors in a locale. So we need mediators, and I see these links between these forms of cooperation as forms of mediation between these two entities. And then there's the question of third party, and this third party is put in brackets because it's not that it's, I think, as it was so many times stated here, it's the vital part, it's the vital ingredient inside of this triangle of interest, and these are the users, inhabitants, citizens, which actually come in between of this triangle, I would say, of cooperation between academia, NGOs, and other practitioners. So I will try to give a basic description of mechanisms of cooperation, while less emphasis will be put on description of mere cases of cooperation. Nevertheless, a few cases will be briefly mentioned, just to give an illustration of cooperation mechanisms between academia and other stakeholders. I will still, it won't be possible to evade some cases because I believe they are necessary to illustrate what do I mean by this. Maybe also a not so brief description of our research center, because this was also put forward by Vera that she wants to hear more about our Center for Spatial Sociology, which functions at the University of Ljubljana. I won't read through all the description of what center has done and what has been, what's its history. Maybe just this, it has quite a long tradition. It was established in 1969. And that there was in the beginning, there was a huge debate how to name it. Why Center for Spatial Sociology? Why not Center for Urban Sociology? And so it was a huge debate, also within the university, within the faculty, because they didn't want to put it just to into the dimension of urban sociology, but they wanted to spread the, let's say, the examination, the analysis, the research also to the level of rural and natural areas. So we believe that spatial includes more of these dimensions. This is why it was put spatial. But let's say in Anglo-Saxon view, that would be spatial, would be in space in the general terms of a very, very, or I would say much broader space that not only, let's say, limited to this planet, but to the spatial dimension as well. Okay, these are a few pictures from the center at the very beginning. You can imagine these starting points in history, where the discipline was already, let's say, in the making. And here are a few cases in which the center worked at that time. After the Second World War, there were needs for new cities, and this is one of the new cities which was formed, the city of Ljubljana, which is a completely new city. Well, let's say the majority of the city is new, I would say so. And the center performed a quite important role inside, cooperating with teams of architects and urbanists to form, let's say, adequate spaces for this city. And this was kind of a famous study done at that time after the Second World War. Short description, we have 12 permanent and temporary associates in the center, 12 external collaborators, and we performed maybe more than, from the 1960s on, we performed more than 70 domestic and international research projects. Just to give you a brief description. And now to the types of cooperation between academia, NGOs, and practitioners. So as I see this cooperation between, let's say, our center and other NGOs and practitioners, I always bump into this same question that each form of cooperation is site-specific. It's tailored or custom-made. Depends on the nature of the study and client that order a specific type of study. According to these demanded elements of the study, of course, it is important to differentiate between direct and indirect cooperation within this triangle of cooperation. What do I mean by direct and indirect cooperation? Well, direct cooperation demands specific types of involvement, which is supposed to generate change within social groups on the location of study. So generate direct change, directly influence when you come to the terrain. And we've done this. We've done this in specific cases. We try to directly influence, but not influence in this social engineering case. Influence through talks, influence through dialogues, influence through mediation. And this was the typical example was when we performed individualized mobility campaign within the Civitas Elan project, which was dealing with mobility. So basically, there was identified a group of people which do not use sustainable transport, and we tried to talk with them, we tried to make dialogue with them, and go deeply into their stories to identify which are the elements which push them into a specific, which are the contextual elements which push them into this situation that they don't use the sustainable modes of transport. So we try to somehow show them or educate, or I wouldn't even say educate, we just try to have some kind of experiential learning from each other and try to establish the positive points which would stem from maybe a different contextual environment if it was formed in the future. And then on the other hand, you have indirect cooperation between involved actors, which demands from research teams to act as independently as possible when analyzing specific form of spatial phenomena and location. And this type of influence is what generates change, is performed indirectly. In these terms, I mean that we, for example, analyze a specific phenomenon that is being observed, that has been noticed in the space, and then through our data, which is put forward to another actor, still influence the situation on terrain. And this was the case, for example, of acceptance of yellow belts in Ljubljana, or shared spaces, for example, in Ljubljana, between citizens which use these spaces in the case of Ljubljana, which I believe also a lot of you saw when visiting Ljubljana. So yellow belts were not always there in Ljubljana, but were formed in cooperation between partners and stakeholders and city and the local communities in Ljubljana during this project, which is called Civitas Elan. And our role was, in this sense, to analyze how the people perceive the future implementation of yellow lanes. And by this, we did not directly influence, but indirectly influence by giving policy recommendations maybe to the city municipality. So the question is who actually generates change from our point of view in terms of this spillover effect that are generated from research data. There are so many cases which I could use, also the case of preparation of strategic spatial panel of Ljubljana, where we also participated. So I think that this spillover effect, which is made by just using data and preparing data, also generates change, not directly, but indirectly. And there are a few, I will just go through a few cases where we also took form, and where we also tried to function as a form of maybe mediation, or we just tried some other form of cooperation between various stakeholders. And there was also, of course, a debate of road pricing in Ljubljana at that time. At the end, we don't have the road pricing because the data showed that it would be devastating to use road data. I mean, politically, it would be devastating to use road pricing. So instead, the mayor rather decided to elevate the the parking prices, which is also some kind of road pricing in this regard. So softly, let's say, changing the structure of how people perceive new mobility strategies. And these are the yellow lanes, which I already talked about. And this is a small piece of information from the research that we've done regarding the road pricing in Ljubljana, and which shows, in fact, how the public opinion works. I'd rather pay for access to the city center than stop driving there. And of course, the majority of the population did not directly oppose this proposal, but had some kind of sublime opposition towards the process of implementation of road pricing. And this was obvious also in other cases. And then I come to this slide, which is, I believe, quite important in the case of what we heard that is maybe going on in other cities, that is going on also in different social contexts, because UL project consists of 4 partners, which are embedded in very different social contexts. And this slide really nicely shows specific dimensions which maybe prevent specific types of cooperation in our city, but would not prevent specific types of cooperation in other cities maybe. And this was a case when we asked people, who do you trust most? In the case of renovation of an area, in case of if there is a conflict, in the case of new mobility plans, of new mobility strategies, whom would you trust most? And the people answered that they do not trust the city municipality so much. So 16%, almost 70% said that they trust the city municipality. And 22% said that they trust more in NGOs. But surprisingly, or not surprisingly, as the way as you see it, they trust the most to experts. So the experts have this legitimacy power of which we were talking about. So in the case of Slovenia, I believe, I can talk that for the case of Slovenia, the experts still have some kind of legitimization power. It still have an important role inside this, let's say, cooperation triangle. But the problem is that the people don't trust so many city municipalities, which is, there are various reasons why they don't trust. But one is also because of different, let's say, political history, which is about these political histories we talk a lot, and we also talked before, and we'll talk more. So let's say that distrust in political power is quite big, and this is why the experts, in fact, gained so much legitimization power in regard to other entities in this slide. And why I'm using this slide? Just to illustrate you, just to show you the context in which we operate when we try to form some kind of mechanisms of corporations, which are quite different probably to the mechanisms, to the, let's say, relations of cooperation or relation between actors in other cities like in England, Finland, or in Romania. And here's the slide of what happened at the end of Civitas Elan project, which is another, I would say, beautiful example of how the cooperation worked. Why is this? Why I'm so much mentioning this Civitas Elan project? Because Bucharest has a lot of problem with problems, or I wouldn't say problems. I would say challenges related to the mobility issues. And Ljubljana also had this, and the public opinion was not so inclined towards big radical changes. And through the project, when we started the project, there were so many barriers at the beginning. So during the project, which lasted for 5 years, we had to massage the, let's say, the value system of the of various entities which were involved inside. And I literally say massage because there has been a lot of negotiations, talks, and so on. But at the end, in fact, the value system changed within the people which are implementing these projects. And it involved a lot of effort from various entities, from various, there were so many, let's say, structures involved inside this process that it was really a huge effort by the whole, let's say, structure of NGOs, academia, all kinds of actors really were involved in that. It was a common effort. But the, let's say, the turning point was that it was financed, this effort was financed, and this was the, let's say, I would say the turning stone which pushed the thing on. And you saw the results when you were in Ljubljana. Okay, this is from the strategic plan. I will switch on. I have burned out the 20 minutes. How much time do I have?
You have another 3 or something like that.
3 minutes,
yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so intervention, implementation, mechanisms, and outcomes. I try to elaborate even more these forms of cooperations, and I try to divide them into what was the intervention about, what were the mechanisms involved, and what were the outcomes at the end of this process. So we try to address specific types of social groups, drivers, pedestrians, users of all kinds of mobility patterns. And then we try to implement the yellow lanes. And we try to produce various types of analysis regarding specific spaces or locations. How are they being used in terms of mobility, patterns? Yeah. What kind of mechanisms did we use? We used transfer of information from various stakeholders to other stakeholders and vice versa. We used gradual experiential learning of specific publics regarding the advantages of yellow lanes. We try to evaluate the tolerance level of groups that don't approve the implementation of the new mobility strategy. So we try to assess some kind of collateral damage in terms of traveling comfort, which was of extreme importance in this regard. And we try to interact with various interest groups and other think tanks to establish common grounds regarding spatial plans. And the outcomes of this were change of mobility patterns, change of mobility infrastructure, and change of spatial planning models and spatial policies on a large scale. It was a huge effort, and I believe it was worth investing in. And I will finish with this. I will finish with this slide and leave the floor to Urban and Aidan. When I try to think of mechanisms or channels of communication that come in place when applying this type of projects, this type of turning stones, at least in the case of Ljubljana, you have to find some kind of force which pushes you into this new situation, that pushes you into this effort. And I try to structure what type of projects are possible and are being applied on the level of the state, and what kind of processes are being used, and what kind of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary forces are on play in these cases. But maybe, because I don't have much time, maybe I will mention just these hybrids, which I believe are an important factor of change in the future, maybe in the case of cooperation and channels of new channels being open to communicate between these three actors that I mentioned. These hybrids are new transdisciplinary learning projects. And these are being applied by the state. And the state actually tries to support new creative ways of engaging different stakeholders into projects that would, there are applicable projects that would somehow change, somehow improve the living spaces of various social groups of people. And this is now becoming an increasingly important factor. And these hybrids are so important because they really try to implement this interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity options, which are not so present in general in the Slovenian, let's say, university sphere, and also also from the side of NGOs. I mean, this is in fact one of the turning stones which is forcing NGOs, which is forcing academia to cooperate, and local communities, of course, and small and medium enterprises. So 4 actors on the side of these projects, inside these hybrid projects being pushed forward. And I believe these are some interesting cases, but I will stop here and I leave the floor to Urban, and we continue from here.